Hey, this is our third episode of the Flat Organization series and it's called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. Let's get started. The title, The Cathedral and the Bazaar, comes from an article and later a book by Eric S Raymond about ways of developing software, the two ways which he calls the Cathedral way and the Bazaar way. I'm not going to go into detail about that because I'm just stealing his title because I find the metaphor absolutely amazing. So I'm just taking it and applying it to explain my own ideas about flat organizations. But if you do want to read more about what he said, his article is free on his very old-fashioned, charming website, so go and have a look. I find this metaphor incredibly useful when I'm thinking about the two types of organizations, the traditional hierarchical, very well structured, very centralized companies, and the more modern, flat, self-organizing, fluidly structured organizations on the other hand. And I know it's not as simple as saying there's only two types of companies, there's many types of companies, and there's a million shades of gray in between. But for the sake of explaining things, I think this metaphor of the cathedral and the bazaar is mwah. I take four dimensions, and across these four dimensions I highlight the differences between cathedrals and bazaars. And the dimensions are universality versus locality, permanence versus ephemerality, good clean versus good dirty, and one mind versus a marketplace of ideas. Let's take an example. A team needs a new team member and they want to hire someone. How is the hiring decision made, and how does the process of actually hiring someone looks like? In the universality paradigm, we have universal and centralized job description, roles, interview process, and entities such as HR make sure that all these are applied consistently throughout the company. So when the team decides they need a new member, they have to use one of the existing job descriptions. They can't just define their own role, and they have to use an existing process which they didn't come up with or ask for. And a whole bunch of people from outside the team are involved in the decision and the process of who is going to join this team. Opposite to that, we have locality, which would mean that the team can just decide when and who they want and how they're going to interview them, and they run the process and they make the decision. And the team can equally decide to fire someone from inside the team without any other external approval. Permanence. Job descriptions and roles are designed and written in such a way as if they are going to last forever, or at least for a very long time. Ephemerality. The understanding that every role is slightly different and you don't know anything for sure until you actually start doing it. So the team may hire someone with a reasonable set of expectations about what they're going to do, but both the team and that person are going to find and pretty much create their own role as they go along. And that might change in time, and it doesn't have to last forever, and we don't have to pretend like it's going to last forever. Good clean. When the job descriptions are full of detail, when the processes are very clear, when everyone in the big corporate machine fills their very specific roles very precisely. Because even if you have thousands of people in your company, at least in theory, there's only a few dozens of types of jobs that they all do, and you can neatly and cleanly organize them in graphs and charts. Good dirty means that it works best when it's dirty. And what do I mean by dirty? I mean understanding that there's no such thing as perfect uniformity and complete equivalence between people and roles, understanding that each role is slightly different and each person is slightly different and things change, and we don't need to pretend like we have these interchangeable kind of people doing the same job in many different parts of the company as if they were the same. One mind is an extreme degree of centralization of the definition of the job descriptions and the roles and the interview process and the hiring process and the promotion process and the firing process and all those things. These are very highly centralized by a group of people that are aiming for the one way in which all the companies should operate. On the other hand, the free marketplace of ideas means that teams and team leaders and whoever comes up with ideas, they try them out, some work, some don't, but there's always this kind of experimentation going on. There's a number of problems with cathedral companies. Overcomplexity and rigidity is a huge one. The bureaucracy, we talked about it more in the previous episode. And it's not only that you get a lot of stuff and a lot of rules and a lot of processes and regulations, but adding something new or changing something is increasingly difficult because every new thing you want to put in has, in theory at least, have to match and be consistent with everything else, and a million managers have to agree to it. So doing almost anything becomes a pain in the neck. You also have a lot of zombies in cathedral companies, and by zombies I mean ideas, processes, structures, initiatives that were started, put in place. They're not really required or up to date or relevant anymore, but nobody's killing them. Nobody's saying we don't need this anymore, because permanence. They got to pretend like things last for a long time. So in any big cathedral like corporate, you're walking in the land of the living dead. There's a whole bunch of things that shouldn't exist anymore, but they kind of do because nobody put them out of their misery. In these kind of cultures, a quick failure is not seen as a learning opportunity, but as a very bad kind of failure, and everybody is very reluctant about admitting failure, especially a quick failure. Now we looked at how you hire someone. A second example would be about how you design a learning program. So, training and learning resources for the employees of the company. I'm not going to take the dimensions one by one anymore because I think you get the idea by now, but you can imagine how in a cathedral company this is going to be a highly centralized effort where a work group of experts and people from very relevant functions and titles and departments come together to design a very elaborate and long-term, far-seeing 1 year, 2 year, 3 years program with a lot of rules about who from what role should access what kind of learning resource, at what level, under what conditions, how many, in what order, in what sequence. It's a very heavy, centralized, universal, permanent, one mind, looks good, clean kind of effort that is highly bureaucratic and rigid in nature. In a bazaar kind of company, it would pretty much be pull, not push, and very lightweight and lean. And probably it's going to look like, here's a bunch of learning and training resources at your disposal if you want them. If you want them, here they are, and do whatever you want kind of attitude. However, cathedrals also have some advantages. One advantage is that they do make it easier for a big company to achieve a level of mediocrity or good enough, if you will, with unevenly motivated and unevenly skilled people just through the sheer force of the process and the bureaucracy, for whatever that's worth. But I think that's something that they're good at. They're good at taking large numbers of people in many places and sort of putting them together in a half competent kind of way. And sometimes when the conditions are just right, and by just right I mean things don't change too often, cathedral is actually a very good way to go about a problem, because that single-minded focus works very well when you figure out the problem once and then you just have to execute it. That's a good way to go about business if things don't change. Problem is, there's fewer and fewer places, situations where things don't change. Things typically change all the time, and that's the big reason why cathedrals don't work. Cathedrals would work much better in a more static business environment than the one we're living in today. Bazaars are much more flexible, more suitable in dealing with change, and this combined with their leaner structure makes them much more adaptable and resilient in uncertain situations. And they do have a lot of advantages, like I've been highlighting through these examples, but they're not perfect either. A bazaar is not going to work out magically all the time in 100% of the cases in which you try it. Bazaars can devolve into a kind of structure where teams are very, very isolated from each other and they don't collaborate, and they're very close-minded and only focus on their own thing, and where little bosses lead teams, sometimes in not so good ways. So that's not how you want to end up with a bazaar. And I think the key thing that you need in order to have a bazaar-like company organization structure succeed is some form of central governance. And I use the word governance on purpose because I don't mean detailed instructions or rules or processes telling teams what to do when and how to react in specific situations. I don't think you need to tell teams a lot of that. But by central governance, I mean a very short set of principles, values if you will, about how we act in this company, the rules of the game. And it is the responsibility of senior leadership to come up with those rules and to clearly communicate them and push them. But once you have these rules of the game well understood and well acknowledged, then you can have a lot of autonomy in the teams. How do you lead in a bazaar? So being a leader in a cathedral company is the traditional way of being a leader, and we all kind of know it. We have, formal job descriptions, formal responsibilities. We're involved in formal processes where we exercise our formal authority. And alongside that, of course, we can exercise other kinds of leadership, but the backbone is that kind of formal set of responsibilities that you have. How do you lead in a bazaar company if you're not supposed to give people instructions, if you're not supposed to tell them what to do on a day-by-day basis, if you're not supposed to manage things directly? What's left? Are you just some kind of a coach, encouraging people and supporting people, but pretty much staying back and letting them do their own thing? Well, yeah and no. Actually, not that much. A leader in a bazaar company is not just a supporter, encouraging people. It's a very active, leading by example, first to do something out there on the front lines kind of role, but in a different way, in this way. So first and foremost, you make those rules of the game clear. Then you provide constant direction and vision to the team about the main objectives. What's the product that we're building here? What is the client's need? That kind of stuff. And you don't see yourself as a controller or as an organizer of what the people in your team do, but see yourself as an entrepreneur of ideas and initiatives. You come up with ideas and initiatives inside your team, but not as a manager. So you don't get them all in a meeting and say, hey guys, I want to do this, or let's all decide about how to do this or that. That kind of one mind, universal approach, you don't need to do that in most situations. But rather, just do something and see who else copies what you're doing because they think it's a good idea. Or talk about something and see if people agree with you and take your idea and implement it themselves. So spread the ideas. This is the free market of ideas. You put things out for sale, for lack of a better word, to your team and to your peers. Only that you're not selling products, you're selling ideas, you're selling new ways of doing things, you're selling initiatives, you're selling better ways of doing things. And by example, and by talking about them, and by showing them, and by exemplifying them, and by teaching them, your ideas are going to be bought, they're going to spread, and that's how you drive change as a leader in a bazaar company team. And you got to get very comfortable with tolerating tension and ambiguity and even conflict, if it's not the toxic kind of conflict. Traditional management is all about everything has to be clear, we gotta have no questions, we gotta have a clear rule, procedure for everything, and if two people disagree, oh, we must all make them agree immediately. But in a bazaar company, you thrive on the ambiguity, and you thrive on the tension, it's the creative tension. People with different ideas, different initiatives, competing in a good way. Again, if it gets toxic, you have to step in, but competing to see which one of them is best and trying different things at the same time and seeing which one of them has longer legs and will have more success. Not knowing all the answers and living with that ambiguity without having to rush to a kind of a fake answer. These are very important skills in a bazaar-like company, and as a leader in such an organization, you need to get really comfortable and good with this kind of stuff. Don't micromanage. I mean, yeah, if the company is burning and you need to put out a fire right now, if it's like a real crisis, do micromanage enough to put out the fire, but this extreme situation aside, don't micromanage. Let people try things, even if not all of them work, is actually expect that most of them aren't going to work. Let solutions emerge. You don't have to decide on solutions in the meeting room. Let solutions emerge in reality, get proven by actually working in real life, and lend your weight and your influence as a leader to not only support your own ideas and initiatives, but also other ideas and initiatives in your team that you think are worth supporting. And yeah, and it only works with trust. Like we talked about in the previous episode, this kind of company, this kind of organization doesn't work unless there's some genuine level of trust in between the people. And that's it for this episode, and I'll see you next time.